Welcome back to the Humble Market Timer YouTube channel. Once again, if you enjoy the content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Today's video, I want to revisit silver. Is the setup approaching an MTOP? Before I go any further, here's my disclaimer. Once again, these are my sole ideas, not investment advice. I did a video a couple weeks back on silver, and I expressed how we were on the verge of potentially something historic in the move in silver. I talked about there being about almost a 45-year cup and handle formation setup, and how that could potentially lead to a massive break higher. But I want to kind of narrow the scope a little bit more to what the chart is telling us right at this very moment. So as you can see here, I have a chart of silver. It's a daily chart, and it's about 18 to 19 month version of the price action in silver. And as you can see, silver has pretty magically, as I like to say, traded within a very tight parallel for a very extended period of time, leading back into early 2024. And then we actually broke out of the parallel in September. And that was when we made that push past $50. And some people always ask, how do you know you have a really good parallel? Because there's so many lines and so many dips. Sometimes they can fall below the parallel. But in my opinion, you can always tell you have a good parallel when you have multiple hits at the upper range of or the top of the parallel, which you have here and here, and you can see a little bit here. And you also have multiple hits at the bottom of the parallel, which is here, here. Here you broke through the parallel, but you came back, and then you have another hit here. But really the main thing that lets you know that you have a good parallel is when you have multiple hits at the midpoint. And as you can see here, you had a hit where it acted as support or resistance here, 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 multiple hits at that midpoint line. So that lets you know you have a really good parallel. And to really even take it even further, if you were to move this line up and replace the bottom with the midpoint, if you do that there, you will also see even in the smaller parallel, look at how many hits are at the midpoint of the smaller parallel. So that just lets you know this is a good parallel. It is telling you the story of silver, and it is amazing how silver has traded so uniformly in this parallel over a year. But as you can see, we broke out the parallel in September, and we made a peak at around $54, and in the last month or so we had a dip. But if you notice, we have started to recover off that dip, and I know it's kind of hard for you to see, but if you expand this a little bit, you can kind of see in this action here where the dip occurred, this is actually a very small inverse head and shoulder. And as you can see, if I can get rid of that inverse head and shoulders, as you can see, we have broken out of that neckline. And if you do a measured move by looking at the bottom of the inverse head and shoulders to the neckline and you measure it, you should get a breakout to about $53, right around at $53. And so that would be a measured move from a break of this inverse head and shoulders. This was a very bullish setup to get a solid bounce once we had that dip off the highs. And you can see the measured move would put it at about $53, just below the all-time high that we made about a month ago. But I want you to kind of pay attention to a couple of things. If that is the case, you are now setting up this chart for MTOP pattern. And an MTOP pattern often happens when you break out of a parallel. You tend to get peaks, and the MTOP formation sort of identifies the peak. And so usually when you have that MTOP, it usually either comes just barely above the other top portion of the M, right at the other top portion of the M, or just below the other portion of the M. So I want you to be on the lookout for potentially a move like this, where you have the dip and then you have a move to about maybe here, and then you have a possible retrace. And oftentimes when you get that MTOP formation, you retrace typically first back to the upper portion of the main parallel. So this will initially act as support for the price, but oftentimes you get a slight bounce here, but it forms a bit of a bull flag, and many times you head back into the parallel. So even though I still believe silver is going much higher, the environment is just screaming for inflation and screaming for precious metals, gold, to just keep increasing in price, you always have pullbacks when you get these massive breakouts. And a lot of times the parallel acts as gravitational pull to the price. When it does break out, it tends to eventually find its way back into the parallel. So be on the lookout for potentially a move where you head back into the parallel. Now, you could have a move where it breaks this high, and if that's the case, we're going to go much higher. But if we do get this MTOP and we find that the price the resistance happens right in that mid-50s, that $53, $54 range, and we can't break it, look for price to eventually pull back down, back into the parallel. I believe it will only be for a short period of time, but this could be an ideal time to add to your silver position if you are fearful of the MTOP, which I think it may be forming. When we have that peak back up to that $53 range, that may be an area for you to take profits. And then when we come back into the parallel and you want to get back into those precious metals, that would be an ideal time to get back into silver. Hope you like the content. Be on the lookout for that possible MTOP. If you like the content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.